Today, I invite you to listen to a story that may seem simple at first glance, but holds a powerful reminder for all of us. It begins in a busy airport in the United States, where an elderly couple quietly takes a seat in the first-class lounge. They're dressed simply. They speak politely. And within moments, they're confronted by a young flight attendant who believes they don't belong. What follows is an unexpected chain of events, full of tension, regret, and a twist no one at that terminal saw coming. But this story isn't just about class, or age, or misunderstanding. It's about how we see others, and how we often fail to see what truly matters. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories that touch the heart. Now, let's get into it. The hum of JFK Airport was thick with rolling suitcases, boarding calls, and murmured conversations. Gate B42 was particularly busy that afternoon, with a flight to San Francisco boarding soon. The first-class lounge area near the gate glowed under the overhead lights, its leather seats arranged neatly for those with premium tickets. Melissa Harris, a young flight attendant in her late 20s, adjusted her red scarf as she walked briskly toward the lounge. She had just received a message from the ground staff. 2 elderly passengers were seated in the first-class waiting area, but there was no record of them having upgraded tickets. Melissa's training had been clear: uphold the rules. No exceptions. As she approached, she spotted them. A man and woman, both likely in their late 70s, sat quietly next to each other. The man wore a soft gray cardigan over a collared shirt, and the woman clutched a small handbag on her lap. Her silver hair was neatly brushed, and she wore a peaceful smile as she leaned slightly toward her husband. Melissa stopped in front of them, her hands firmly on her hips. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but loud enough to draw attention from nearby travelers. "This area is reserved for first-class passengers only." The elderly man looked up with kind eyes. "We're just waiting here a moment. Our grandson has our tickets." He went to the kiosk to reprint them. Melissa pointed to the sign posted just behind them. "I understand, sir, but this is a secured seating zone. Only those with first-class boarding credentials are allowed. You'll need to wait in the general area." The old woman shifted, her expression still gentle. "We don't mean to cause trouble. We didn't know." Melissa's tone sharpened. "I'm sorry, but we can't make exceptions." Several people in the terminal had now paused to look. Some with coffee in hand. Others subtly recording with their phones. The couple remained calm, but their presence seemed to disturb the order Melissa believed she was protecting. Seconds stretched longer. The hallway lights flickered slightly overhead. A low announcement about another flight echoed from a nearby gate, but the tension at B42 made everything else feel silent. Then, footsteps approached from the far end of the terminal. A man in a navy blue blazer moved quickly toward them. He wasn't smiling. Benjamin Clark walked with purpose. His polished shoes tapped firmly against the terminal floor, the movement of his tailored blazer matching the steady rhythm of his pace. In his hand, he held 3 freshly printed boarding passes. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were locked on the scene unfolding just ahead. He saw them immediately, his grandparents, sitting side by side in the first-class lounge, surrounded by curious stares. And in front of them, a flight attendant was pointing at them with an air of authority that made Benjamin's jaw tighten. "Grandma, Grandpa," he said as he reached them, kneeling slightly to their level. "I'm sorry I took so long." The elderly couple smiled in unison. The woman placed a hand on his cheek as if to reassure him. Melissa, now caught off guard, cleared her throat. "Sir, this area is restricted to." Benjamin stood upright and looked her directly in the eyes. Calm, but firm. "I know. These are our boarding passes." He handed them over. Melissa scanned the first pass. Then the second. Then the third. Her confidence faltered as she reached the third name, Benjamin Clark. Her eyes widened slightly. The name had been in articles. Tech headlines. Business roundtables. Even the airline's own internal newsletter. Benjamin Clark wasn't just a successful young entrepreneur. He was one of the primary investors behind the very airline she worked for, Skylinks Airways. Melissa stiffened. A bead of sweat touched the side of her temple. I didn't know, she whispered, unsure whether she was speaking to him or to herself. Benjamin took a slow breath and gently stepped closer. He didn't raise his voice. But there was something in his calm that cut deeper than anger ever could. You didn't ask. You assumed, he said quietly. He turned to help his grandmother up from the seat, then extended his other hand to his grandfather. The old man rose slowly but without hesitation, gripping Benjamin's shoulder for support. Melissa stood frozen, still holding the scanned passes. The murmurs around them had quieted, but eyes remained on her. Benjamin looked over his shoulder once more. And then he said something that made the silence even heavier. This isn't about a seat. He turned back toward the gate with his grandparents by his side. But he hadn't finished yet. As Benjamin walked with his grandparents toward the boarding area, the atmosphere remained thick with tension. Passengers glanced away, pretending not to watch, but everyone was still listening. The sound of wheels rolling over the tiled floor echoed in rhythm with each of Benjamin's steps. Melissa stood behind, still holding the scanner, her posture stiff but uncertain. She had made mistakes before, small ones. But this one felt different. It wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about how she had looked at them. Spoken to them. Assumed. At the gate, the boarding door hadn't opened yet. The staff stood quietly, suddenly aware of the gravity of what had happened just meters behind them. Benjamin slowed down and guided his grandparents to a private seating area near the window. Outside, the wings of the Skylinks aircraft gleamed beneath the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. Planes were taxiing in the distance, but everything inside that terminal felt like it had stopped. He turned to his grandparents, helping them settle again. You okay? He asked. His grandfather chuckled. It's been a while since someone yelled at me like that. Felt like being back in school. His grandmother smiled too, patting his hand. She was doing her job. But the world's moving too fast now. People forget to look twice. Benjamin nodded. He stood quietly for a moment, then turned back toward the gate counter where Melissa was still standing. Her eyes met his from afar. For a moment, she looked like she might walk away. Instead, she approached. When she reached him, she took a breath and spoke first. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet tremble beneath it. I should have handled that differently. Benjamin looked at her, not with judgment, but with honesty. My grandparents were farmers in Nebraska, he said slowly. They raised me after my parents died. They wore the same shoes for years so I could go to school. They built everything I have, without ever asking for anything in return. Melissa looked down, her hands folded. They've never flown first class before, he added. This was meant to be their first experience. And now, that moment, it's gone. Melissa's eyes welled. I truly didn't know. I believe you, Benjamin replied. But that's the point. You never asked. Just then, the announcement for boarding echoed across the terminal. Flight 817 to San Francisco is now boarding. Benjamin looked at his watch. The moment had passed. But something else lingered. Without another word, he reached into his coat pocket. From the inside pocket of his blazer, Benjamin pulled out a small envelope. It was matte black, with a silver embossed logo that shimmered faintly under the terminal lights. He extended it toward Melissa. She hesitated. What is this? An invitation, he said. To a training program I sponsor. We work with airline crew from around the country. Real training. Human connection. How to see people before seeing uniforms. Melissa took the envelope carefully. She turned it in her hands, unsure if she deserved it or was being tested. I'm not looking to punish you, Benjamin added. But I also don't believe in letting moments like this pass without meaning. She opened the envelope slightly. Inside was a single card with her name printed at the top. The words beneath read, Skylink's Leadership and Compassion Initiative, Personal Invitation. Melissa looked up, confused. But why me? Because I watched you today, he said. You reacted the way many people would. But then you stayed. You listened. And you apologized. That matters more to me than a perfect record. Behind them, the line for boarding grew longer. Passengers shuffled forward, unaware of the quiet shift taking place just a few feet away. Benjamin turned to leave but paused once more. My grandfather always says, some seats you don't pay for with money. You pay with presence. With kindness. With remembering where you came from. He gave a slight nod, then returned to his grandparents. As they handed their boarding passes to the agent, Benjamin's arm wrapped gently around his grandmother's shoulders. The three of them stepped into the jet bridge together. Melissa stood still, the envelope clutched to her chest, the crowd moving slowly around her. Just before Benjamin disappeared down the corridor, he turned his head slightly and caught her eyes once more. Then he was gone. The flight took off 10 minutes later. A week passed. Melissa returned to her regular shift schedule at JFK, but something had shifted in her. The moment at gate B42 lingered like an echo, playing in her mind between boarding calls and drink carts. The black envelope never left her apartment. She hadn't yet decided whether she was worthy of opening it fully. One rainy morning, while sorting mail outside her modest Queens apartment, she noticed a cream-colored envelope mixed in with the flyers. The handwriting was slow and elegant, the kind that carried decades of patience. The sender, Helen Clark. Melissa's breath caught. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Melissa. I wanted to write this myself, not because Ben asked me to, but because I felt it in my heart. That day at the airport was awkward, wasn't it? But it also reminded me of something I had nearly forgotten, that people still listen. That people still reflect. You may not know this, but I used to be a teacher. For over 30 years, I stood in front of students, not always knowing who would listen or who would grow. But sometimes, all it took was one student, one moment, to remind me why I did it. You reminded me of that. Thank you for owning your moment. Thank you for staying present. We don't expect the world to get things right the first time. But we hope it tries again, Kinder. Warmly. Helen Clark. Melissa sat with the letter in her lap, motionless. The ink bled slightly at the edge where a raindrop had kissed the paper. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. She stared at the words, then back at the invitation on her table. A different kind of silence filled the room. One that asked no questions, only gave space to decide. Later that afternoon, she logged into the website printed at the bottom of the card. The program began in 2 weeks, and there was a spot still open, reserved in her name. She clicked accept. But what she didn't know was that far away, across miles of farmland in Nebraska, Helen Clark sat beside her husband, watching the sunset. And she had just finished writing one more letter. The sun sank behind the cornfields of Lincoln, Nebraska, casting golden streaks across the Clark family porch. Birds chirped lazily in the distance while Helen Clark folded the final piece of stationery and slipped it into another envelope. She smiled as she sealed it, placing it on a small stack addressed to different names in different cities. Beside her, Arthur Clark sat with his favorite book resting on his lap, though he hadn't turned a page in minutes. Instead, he was watching his wife. Quiet admiration lingered in his eyes. You still writing thank you notes? He asked gently. Helen nodded. Always. But this one's different. This one is for someone who still doesn't know what she's about to become. Arthur chuckled. You mean Melissa? Helen smiled. No. I mean all the Melissas. The ones who haven't learned yet how powerful they can be when they choose grace over pride. Back in New York, Melissa was packing a small suitcase. The training was being held in Seattle, a city she had never visited. She folded her uniforms with care, sliding the black card between layers of clothing as if it were too fragile to be seen by the world. She had declined invites before. Promotions. Transfers. Even dinners. But this felt different. This was not an opportunity. It was a calling. As she zipped the suitcase shut, her phone buzzed. A new email. Subject, your flight to Seattle, confirmed. There were 3 tickets under her name. Flight 2037, Seat 2A. Skylinks First Class. Melissa blinked. She hadn't booked it. She hadn't even confirmed the flight yet. And then, at the bottom of the email, was a single line. Some seats aren't just for the privileged. They're for those willing to grow into them. BC. She sat down slowly, her hands on the edge of her bed. The world had shifted again, but gently this time. That night, as the city lights blinked against her window, Melissa dreamed of gates and runways and names she hadn't met yet. And far across the country, a farmer's wife smiled softly at the stars, knowing the letter she had sent was already in the right hands. 6 months later, the Skylinks terminal at JFK looked the same, rows of leather seats, rolling luggage, hurried steps, and overhead calls echoing through the atrium. But for Melissa Harris, nothing felt the same. She now walked the terminal differently. Not faster or slower, but with a grounded grace. Her posture was steady, her eyes more observant. She had completed the entire Skylinks Compassion Initiative. Not only had she graduated at the top of her cohort, but she had also been asked to mentor the next wave of participants. That afternoon, she was assigned to Gate C11. A routine departure to Denver. As she approached, she noticed a woman, young, holding a toddler, struggling to find her boarding pass while juggling a backpack and a snack-stained stuffed bear. Before the woman could ask for help, Melissa was already there. Take a seat, I've got this, she said gently, crouching to pick up the crumpled pass on the floor and scanning it. You're all set. The woman's face lit with relief. Thank you so much. I didn't expect anyone to even notice. Melissa smiled. Sometimes noticing makes all the difference. She walked back toward the boarding desk when her supervisor waved her over. Melissa, new assignment. Gate B42. First class boarding for San Francisco. Melissa paused. That gate. That flight. The memory returned all at once, the confrontation, the calmness of the couple, Benjamin's voice, the envelope, the letter, the choice. She nodded and walked there slowly. When she arrived, the seating area was quiet. Only a few passengers had arrived early. Among them, she saw an older woman with silver hair helping her husband unwrap a peppermint candy. The couple looked around as if searching for someone. Melissa approached them with a warm smile. Can I help you both with anything? The woman looked up, surprised. Oh, we're just waiting for our grandson. He's the one who got us these first-class tickets. We've never flown this way before. Melissa's eyes softened. No problem at all. You're in the right place. She reached down and adjusted a small pillow behind the gentleman's back. Then she knelt to eye level and said, Take your time. This seat is exactly where you belong. As Melissa stood and turned, she caught her reflection in the glass behind them. She didn't see the uniform. She saw someone who had once needed to be reminded of the same thing. At that moment, a message pinged on her work tablet. Incoming passenger, Benjamin Clark. He was on the manifest. Melissa blinked, lips parting in quiet disbelief. She looked back at the elderly couple she had just welcomed. They were smiling now, peacefully holding hands. She didn't ask for confirmation. She didn't need to. Because some things don't come full circle by chance. They arrive, exactly when they're meant to. What you just heard was more than a story about a mistake at an airport. It was more than a misunderstanding between a young woman in uniform and an old couple looking for a quiet seat. It was more than a twist involving a powerful grandson with wealth and influence. No, this story holds something deeper. Something timeless. It holds a mirror to our world today. We live in a time where appearances rule judgment. The way someone dresses, the age of their skin, the shoes they wear, the brand of the phone in their hand, these become our standards of who deserves respect. It's tragic, but it's true. Kindness has become conditional. Dignity has become negotiable. And assumptions move faster than understanding. But then comes a story like this. A story that quietly enters your heart, not with noise, but with reflection. Let us begin with Melissa. A young flight attendant, following rules, trained to maintain order. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't evil. She was simply thoughtless. And sometimes, in our daily lives, that's the most dangerous kind of mistake, when we stop seeing people and start seeing categories. When we look at an elderly couple and see inconvenience. When we hear the words, "Our grandson is coming," and assume it's just an excuse. But Melissa's journey is not one of shame, it's one of growth. And that's what makes her a symbol for all of us. She made an error in judgment, but she didn't run from it. She faced it. She stayed in the room. She listened. She apologized. And then, she acted. Growth isn't about never being wrong. It's about what we choose to do once we realize we are. Then we have Benjamin Clark. A man of quiet power. Someone who could have used his influence to humiliate Melissa, to flex his authority, to teach her a lesson, in the way the world so often applauds, through punishment. But he didn't. Instead, he taught her through something more powerful. Compassion. Education. Opportunity. He offered her a hand instead of a hammer. Why? Because he understood something that many forget: respect isn't something to be demanded. It's something to be modeled. Benjamin had been raised by those same grandparents. He knew where he came from. He knew the sacrifice behind the ticket they never had to buy. And in that knowledge, he found humility. You see, real power doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. Real power holds a door open. Real power chooses mercy when vengeance would be easier. Let's talk about the grandparents. They are the silent soul of the story. They represent a generation that built without recognition. That gave without expectation. That walked through life carrying burdens without asking the world to notice. But even in silence, they carried grace. When they were accused, they didn't raise their voices. When they were judged, they didn't defend themselves in anger. They trusted. And in that trust, they showed dignity. The grandmother later writes a letter to Melissa. Not to gloat. Not to remind her of her mistake. But to affirm her humanity. Because some of the most powerful acts in life are done not to prove a point, but to protect a person's spirit. Let that sink in. Now pause for a moment. Reflect. How many Melissas exist in this world? How many times have we misjudged someone based on how they look, how they speak, or where they sit? How many times have we passed a person in need and assumed they were lazy, or broken, or less? And how many times have we been judged unfairly ourselves? This story is not about a single airport incident. This story is about every hallway of life where someone is made to feel like they don't belong. Every time a security guard follows a young black man in a store. Every time a woman in a hijab is treated like a threat. Every time an elderly man is ignored in a conversation because he isn't useful anymore. Every time someone walks into a room and is made to feel small because their money or status isn't visible. The lesson is clear. We are not called to determine who is worthy of kindness. We are simply called to give it. Respect should not be earned through titles, but given through recognition of shared humanity. And the seats we assign to others in this world, whether in our planes, our hearts, or our communities, must never be limited to those who look the part. Now let us return to the ending. Melissa didn't just accept a second chance. She became someone new. Not perfect, but intentional. She became the very person she needed that day at the gate, someone who noticed. Someone who paused. Someone who offered dignity before judgment. And what about Benjamin? He sent one more boarding pass. A silent gesture. A reminder that our journeys don't always begin where we expect them to. Sometimes the real journey starts after the plane lands. After the apology. After the understanding. After the reflection. So what should we take from this? We must begin again. We must challenge the way we look at others. We must unlearn what society has taught us about appearances. We must sit in discomfort when we are corrected. And we must offer the hand of compassion to those willing to change. And when we have the power to humiliate someone weaker, we must instead uplift them. For that is the true definition of honor. To every viewer, may you walk into this day with new eyes. Eyes that don't rush to categorize. Ears that listen beyond words. Hands that offer before asking. And hearts that remember. Some seats are not paid with dollars. They are paid with sacrifice. They are earned through love. And they are given only to those who know what it means to see the soul behind the face.